All right, I guess I'll introduce myself. A little weird since I'm the dev stage and now a moderator as well. But welcome to this session. My name is Anke Liu. I'm a program manager on the ecosystem team of the Stellar Development Foundation, and I lead the Stellar Community Fund. And I'll talk a bit more about what that entails later on. So today we are going to talk about the future of community funding. And there's some exciting things I want to talk about. I want to talk about DAOs. I want to talk about what they're going to be like and what not. And I have a very special guest on the stage here. Kelsey, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
So, hello and thank you for having me at Meridian. My name is Kelsey Nabin. I'm a PhD candidate at RMIT University in Australia, so I'm a researcher in an institutional economics research hub and school for automated decision making and society. And then I'm also the governance research lead at Block Science. So we're a complex systems research and development firm, which is distributed.
Awesome. Well, we're honored to have you on the stage. Thank you so much for coming. All right. Well, let's get to the topic. We only have a half an hour. So I wanted to introduce that we have an exciting new discussion going on around on the Stellar Community Fund and really trying to see what the future of SCF could look like. So for context, the Stellar Community Fund, or SCF for short, is an open application grant program hosted by the Stellar Development Foundation that gives out up until 24 million XLM to developers and businesses each year. So it's a very exciting program, and it's based on community input. So very special program, very different from some of our other grant programs. And not only have these developers and businesses a chance to win funding, but they also receive support and feedback from community members and make invaluable connections and really secure a place into the ecosystem. Just for context, SCF and its predecessor has been around since 2016, so it's one of the oldest in the blockchain history, as I might claim. It's been iterated almost every round, so it's kind of like to really meet the needs of the ever-evolving community and ecosystem. We have SCF actually runs in biannual rounds each year, and each round consists of like submissions coming in, and then the community will actually vote on which projects they think deserve their rewards. So I'm actually part of the SCF for 6 rounds now, and to date, what's been my my discovery to date has been how valuable organic community participation is to the SCF. It really, having an active and thriving community really helps improve the projects, really gives them the feeling that they're part of something bigger. As we get each round, which is a good thing, we're getting higher and higher amount of submissions, like both in numbers and quality, and it's a really great thing. But now we also have to get to the other part of the equation, like the community. Community support is needed more and more now than ever, and I think, and I want to see if we can build a program that can keep up with that need. So, kind of like the topic, it says it, DAO, turning SCF into DAO. It's a little bit of a marketing title, I must say. But, as I can see, like DAOs are really a new development in this space of organizing and that are exploring these features. And since Stellar, as you all know, is implementing native smart contract functionality, we were thinking, well, maybe we can explore DAOs. What would that be like, right? So just so you know, we have not decided anything. We are exploring, we are learning, and we are researching about DAOs with the community. So we begin an educational journey, and that is why we have Kelsey here today to answer some of our burning questions. All right, well, that was more of my spiel, and now Kelsey will do most of the talking. So I have a few questions for you, and there will also be some time for the audience to ask some questions at the end. So get ready. All right, so, I've been talking about DAOs a lot, right? But what is a DAO?
Yeah, so how many people are familiar with the concept of a decentralized autonomous organization? Yeah, how many people participate in one? Less. Yeah, interesting. So I guess theoretically speaking, or in sort of academic terms, a DAO is a broad organizational framework for a group of people coordinating towards a shared purpose. The phrase actually emerged before public blockchains, or not in conjunction with public blockchains, but more recent definitions include that there is some blockchain-based component to this coordination. What that component actually is, or how a DAO is structured as an organizational framework, is not defined. So we see, very broad and very diverse kind of communities or applications calling themselves a DAO, but really this is an open space. It's kind of a new area of organizational science, a multidisciplinary one, and one that a number of very interesting kind of scholars from different areas are exploring, largely in conjunction with practitioners. And so a lot of my research has been around DAO methods. So how do you actually either analyze or design a DAO? And I'm a social scientist, I'm not a developer, but like I said, I work with engineers. And so one of the first kind of questions that I would ask when approaching any DAO or thinking about the potentiality of a DAO is, those letters. So what is being decentralized? What is being made autonomous, who or what, and what is being organized. And I think the latter is this really key point around the animating purpose of a DAO. So what is the actual point that this, group of stakeholders wants to jointly pursue?
Yes, and I guess you bring up an exciting, interesting point, right? So what are those letters? So, starting with the first one, really, what is decentralization in DAOs, and how do we even define that? What makes a DAO decentralized? Because we've seen a broad spectrum, I think, as well.
Yeah, and this is again, one of those kind of stumbling blocks. I didn't mean to pun it, but in blockchain, when people think about, are we decentralized yet or whatever? So I think a good reference point for thinking about decentralization in the context of blockchain communities is the post by Vitalik Buterin in 2017 entitled "The Meaning of Decentralization." And that talks about being geographically decentralized, so the actual kind of infrastructure of the network, the hardware, the miners, the stakers, the people participating are distributed, and being politically decentralized or decentralized in power. So there's not kind of central points of failure or trust. And so those key points are interesting. And then a lot of the pioneering research going on in DAOs is kind of looking at other ways of thinking about that. So just drawing on previous kind of examples of non-hierarchical organization or multi-stakeholder systems as well, or multi-scale systems. So we can go a little bit more into some of those models in a bit.
Yeah. I have a few questions before going too deep. Let's really lay a foundation, right? So what are some of the motivations of becoming a DAO? Why would someone maybe either start one or turn an existing organization into one? Yeah,
so I guess it depends on how you kind of conceive of human nature. I think the sort of core ideas of DAOs stem from the core idea of blockchain technology or public blockchain technology. So it really is about these ideas of self-governance and participatory governance. And then we see DAOs emerging for all different reasons, coming back to that animating purpose. So there are investment DAOs. Some of the earliest ones are like Flamingo DAO or the LAO, which are, accredited investors only. The LAO was, a legally viable DAO model, co-founded by a lawyer. And then we see social DAOs, so friends with benefits, and they've got, obviously a cheeky name, but they're about helping creatives leverage Web3 technology for peer-to-peer economies. And then there's a few other categories, and there's a great paper called Legal Wrappers for DAOs, which go through some of these. But then there's another one called utility spread. So it's where a DAO might have these multiple purposes. And so funding, coming back to that investment vehicle point, community-led funding or VC funding is absolutely a category where people are experimenting with this model.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I guess it's crazy to hear. Like, I guess it's more of like a concept, really, rather than just like, oh, it's just one way of doing things, right? Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, I mean, so we've all read a lot about DAOs. We've also, probably read a lot about some of its unintended consequences, right? Which sometimes can happen when you actually code rules into smart contracts, right? So I wonder, when do you think DAOs fail? Like, what are some of the under-acknowledged considerations of becoming a DAO?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think DAOs have been very popular and people are very excited about the phenomenon, but it's also really important to go in with your eyes open. And so my PhD research is actually on resilience in decentralized technologies. And so a large part of analyzing if something is resilient, so adaptive to change for the people that are using it, is looking at these vulnerabilities. And so in DAOs, I've developed a methodology called DAO vulnerabilities. There's a post about it. I've worked with Lido DAO, who's like the largest liquid staking provider, to actually apply this methodology. And the interesting thing about vulnerabilities is once they're identified in socio-technical systems, they can potentially be addressed as well. But the way I think about them in the work I've been doing is across different dynamics of a system. So looking at the social vulnerabilities of a DAO, fundamentally the challenge of human coordination is not solved by the fact that you insert a blockchain or a smart contract at some point. So governance is still messy, and like I said, people are figuring out what their ontologies for governance are, so what model they actually want to design the system in. Obviously, technical failures, so hacks are still very possible, bugs in the code, all of these kinds of things. Economic, so just as in blockchain-based systems, people can collude, do flash crashes of the market. And then legal is a very, very important vulnerability to consider in DAOs as well. So DAOs don't have legal personality, and there's a lot of policy work going on in different parts of the world. Some people might be familiar with the legislation that came out in Wyoming in the US, but there's not a kind of any kind of regional or global standard, and so founders actually do take on a considerable amount of risk operating an organization which could later be labelled as kind of not possible in terms of the token going up. And then environmental is actually one that other people sort of raised to me in the process of developing and applying this methodology. So that's come out as very prominent. If anyone was in the MICA EU legislation session, environmental kind of aspects of blockchain technology are highlighted at that, very strategic level.
Yeah. I mean, those are actually really I guess there's a wide variety of vulnerabilities that we need to take in, that anyone really considering building a DAO should take into consideration very carefully, right? This is a new space. This is an exciting space, but it's also, you're building an organization, you're building rules, and the rules are enforced in smart contract functionality and smart contracts. So they need to be designed very well with those considerations in mind.
And I'd just add, in some components, so again, like with this diversity of DAOs, there's not necessarily not all DAOs are automated. And so the DAOs that, we see, even the big, multi-million-dollar ones, are this compilation. I wrote about this in a recent paper called The Ethnography of a DAO, like this janky compilation of Web 2 and Web 3 components. So, it's actually, the DAO occurs in a Discord chat, which is a third-party platform. And then, voting proposals go on a blog on Discourse. And then voting happens on Snapshot, a decentralized gasless application. And then it might be 3 multi-sig signers that actually move the money to execute on that vote. And so there's blockchain because there's cryptocurrency, but it's not necessarily automated. And then I can go into the difference between automation and autonomy, but we also don't have to go there.
Yeah, we could talk on for like hours about this. No, yeah, for sure. I think that is really interesting. So like both like on-chain and off-chain, and that kind of like combines smart contracts, blockchain with the real world. How do you combine that? How do you enforce that? Like, how does that work?
Yes, and that's what I mean by a socio-technical system. It's just the complex interplay between the social and the technical dynamics, and that those can't be considered in isolation of one another.
Yes. That's really interesting. And also, like, you were mentioning earlier some of like more like this design considerations, like structure, like, the rules of, a DAO in speaking. So, yeah, so what are some of the, like I've read about like different governance models. I've read about different like, membership models, like how to become actually a member of DAOs. Would you want to, elaborate a bit more on governance models and membership models if possible?
Yeah, sure, and feel free to prompt me as we go through on what's most interesting. So in terms of governance models, there's a couple of kind of strata to think about this. So one is around that ontology that I mentioned before. So is your organization or your community going to be a plutocracy? Is it, governance through people that can afford to buy into it? Is it a meritocracy? Is it about, earning reputation or proving, technical competency or, service to the DAO or whatever? And so some of the really interesting research that I refer to in this space is looking at existing organizational theory and seeing if and how that applies in the context of blockchain-based DAOs. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that while DAOs are new, collective governance, social action, community organizing isn't new. So I've got a bunch of research that's publicly available around DAOs and cooperatives, DAOs and data governance, looking at data trust models and how that might apply in a DAO context. I've got a paper on DAOs and cybernetics, so looking at DAOs as through the kind of lens of control theory and kind of thinking about them as just a form of non-hierarchical organization that aims to maximize individuals' autonomy while participating in that system while still being a coherent whole in pursuit of that animating purpose. And so I think DAO governance very much stems from, the purpose and then the kind of, values that the community wants to instill in its kind of governance and norms. So in a lot of ways, the technology kind of comes later as that is implemented, but the design component happens, around that requirements gathering of what the, the people and the purpose is.
Yes, yeah, that's also very interesting, I guess. It's mostly like making sure that those rules, the design, the structure is right, and then you can build it afterwards. Yes.
Yeah, and you asked before, when do DAOs fail?
Yeah.
One of the most important things is to start with that kind of, it's a process of constituting, and there's some wonderful research being done on that particular aspect of DAOs, but if there's not that kind of clearly defined starting point, then it gets really, really hard to do governance, as things evolve, as more people, come and go, and as there's money involved as well. And so it's really difficult without that reference document to draw back to. But we're seeing DAOs with, either terms and conditions or a constitution or a manifesto as this kind of North Star to make sure there is that sort of shared understanding and shared purpose.
Yeah, and those are also more like governance models, and I wonder, with a lot of DAOs around, you kind of buy your way into it, right? So you actually buy the DAO token, and that makes you a member. But I wonder also, is that the only membership model, or are there more? Or yeah.
Yeah, definitely not. And I think this is a very active area of experimentation. I know that word is thrown around so much when it comes to blockchain communities, but there's been a big push, and I refer to the Ethereum ecosystem in a lot of examples because that's where I've spent most time. So this is being with Stellar is kind of a new experience for me, which I'm enjoying. But there has been that push, I think, first with some of the retroactive funding movements. So it's based on prior behavior, you can be rewarded in tokens. And so Gitcoin DAO, that I've done kind of extensive research and participation and writing about, awarded their governance tokens in that way. So they did a retroactive airdrop of governance tokens based on past participation in the funding platform. And so that was really interesting, and actually there was pie charts that went around on Twitter at that time of who got the most kind of governance tokens. And it would be interesting to do kind of more community analysis on whether people thought that was fair or not, or representative, I guess. A very kind of sideways approach that didn't acknowledge prior work on this area, which exists, was the soulbound tokens move as well, which I think, in its most broadest is this move to try and get, identity and reputation systems that aren't just based on buying your way in. So how can you represent, different facets of yourself, and kind of have credentials for different things you've done or different roles that you hold, and then how can those attributes give you access to certain things in the digital space. And so I think when we're starting to talk about different models of membership for DAOs, we're getting into both digital identity and contribution and reward tracking systems. And those are both extremely difficult things to do, or I guess unsolved areas. And so that's why I say it's experimental.
That's why I find it so interesting. I was yes, that's also called reputation-based membership, correct? Or is that similar, or?
There would be people that have written about it in that sense. I don't have one thing in my mind that has called it reputation-based membership, but maybe someone should write about that.
Yeah, someone should write about that, definitely. Maybe we should create it, I don't know. What does the Stellar community think? Should we work on this? Should we kind of work on the edge of innovation? Yes? 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 All right, well, there seems to be some excitement of the community, and to kind of really start to explore, right? And, I have one last question here that's kind of where does one in general begin when even considering to become a DAO? What's the most important thing to even start with?
Yeah, so I think these questions have been very well structured. So there's a nice kind of scaffolding here, with my block science hat on, to think about design requirements. So we've talked about, what is the purpose? So it's how does a DAO, better facilitate a group of people, pursuing that purpose? Is it about, the distribution of trust? Is it about, having, more kind of autonomy because people value it, and so on? And we've talked about, constituting or manifestos in that respect, vulnerability mapping, and I've got plenty more writings on that if you're interested in that kind of methodology and how it's been applied, and would encourage people to further develop it as well. And then, thinking about some of those kind of unsolved areas too, about how are you going to actually, represent people in a digital sphere, and kind of, what kind of backstops do you potentially need when you've got, digital identity or, algorithmic kind of contribution tracking going on. And so just to give a quick example of that, if I may, block science was very involved in Gitcoin DAO from before they became a DAO and through the transition, specifically in their Sybil detection and defense. So helping to identify if it was genuine contributors and participants in the platform, kind of going for funding, like posting funding requests, or making payments because they have a quadratic funding system. So the more, very small donations you get, still the more matched donations that you get. And so there was a whole machine learning pipeline implemented, which is still in operation, and now it's under one of the working groups of Gitcoin DAO called Fraud Detection and Defense. But that kind of analogy just points out how kind of complex these things can get very quickly. So to solve they want better funding, so they put a quadratic funding algorithm in, and then you get Sybil attacks, so bots trying to game the system, and then you need a machine learning pipeline to defend against the Sybil attackers. And then you have a DAO, so you need people that understand how machine learning works, and volunteers and paid labor and budget requests to continue to operate and maintain and improve on that process. And so that's just one small aspect of one DAO, but the kind of layers that go into human coordination and governance are, not necessarily straightforward.
Well, I like that answer a lot. So basically what we're saying is we haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg yet with DAOs. We are definitely, because DAOs really are a way of organizing. We've been perfecting ways of organizing for hundreds of years, corporations, like organizations, methods, and this is a really new way. I think there's a lot of unsolved territories, which some find challenging. I actually am really excited about, because I have a whole community that can help ideate and work together, and really, this is starting to educate and learn. And even if we don't, maybe we decide SCF DAO, it's not for us, it doesn't work for us. Well, we learned a lot on the way, and we definitely are better informed when we will actually implement a DAO.
Yeah, and I just think, to your point about the tip of the iceberg, I think there's definitely a lot more that will unfold in terms of the automated components and kind of AI and DAOs and that sort of as a frontier. I don't think we've seen hardly at all yet. Some interesting examples, other interesting examples of DAOs using automation I've written about are OneHive. So they're a community that develops their own open source software for their own governance, and have very good documentation, and block science has been involved in some components of that as well, around how votes work and kind of voting mechanisms. Something else, but it will come back.
Yes, and so we can go speak for hours and hours and hours and nerd out about DAOs, and you will all leave. But before that, we have actually 1 minute left. Does anyone have any questions for our expert in the field? Burning questions.
Is there, do you know Aragon Network, which I think they are trying to create a standard structure for DAOs? Do you have any favorite structure for it? Or?
Yeah, so one group that I do research with, and people from a whole lot of amazing kind of communities and DAOs that I'm aware of is DAOstar. So you can look up on the website, and what they did through a bunch of workshops was actually propose a DAO standard, and that has been submitted as an EIP, so that documentation is publicly available in terms of a bunch of people that have come together and coordinated around proposing a standard. DAOstar, DAOstar.
We'll need to add that to our resource list on the SCF handbook. I've actually also added some of your other resources that you recommended to the SCF handbook. So if you want to go over to communityfund.stellar.org and then in the menu you can see the SCF handbook. You go to future of the Stellar Community Fund. Sorry, it's a long list of steps, but you'll find it eventually. There's a resource list of some great resources Kelsey has shared. If you want to briefly speak about it, I think we're on time.
Yeah, sure. So there's just the legal paper that I mentioned there. I've posted one of the blogs I've written about the history of DAOs and looking at DAOs from different disciplinary perspectives. There's been a bunch of work across industry and academia through the World Economic Forum. So I've been one of the contributors to a policy toolkit, which is, there's a long report and an even longer one coming called DAOs Beyond the Hype. But what I was going to say before was just that it is an interesting way to think about community ownership and scale. And I think to your first point about one of your takeaways from your experience with SCF is around the value of community participation. DAOs, live and die by that. Like the most amazing DAOs are the ones that are really active and can actually hold people's attention in digital space to participate. And the ones that die are the ones that, no one votes. And so you end up, with people kind of needing to back channel and get, majority and pass things. So yeah, that's another consideration potentially.
Awesome. There's a long list of considerations that we'll actually explore in our upcoming blog series called DAOs and Don'ts. As you can imagine, DAOs, the do's, the things that we should do, and the don'ts, the things that we should not do, and really learn from previous implementations on, what are things that we should consider when even thinking about this, right? Awesome. Well, I think I went a bit over time. Thank you for your flexibility, and really appreciate you coming, Kelsey. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everyone here in the audience listening in and being part of the dawn of this educational journey of the future of community funding. Thank you so much.